Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today, we are honored to have Artur Koldomasov with us to discuss one of the most pressing issues of our time, the ongoing war in Ukraine and its impact on international politics. Artur brings a wealth of knowledge on diplomacy, global power dynamics, and the humanitarian crisis unfolding before our eyes. And in this conversation, we will dive deep into the geopolitical implications of the conflict, explore potential paths to peace, and look at how this war is reshaping the future of global relations. A big thank you to you, Artur, for joining us today. Thank you for your time being with us today. And could you please tell us a bit about your journey, your experience, what inspired you to purpose a career in international politics, diplomacy, and not only, as far as I know?
First of all, thanks for having me. Good time of the day to everyone who's watching. I hope you're doing well. My name is, as you've heard, probably Artur Koldomasov, and currently my main occupations are the non-resident fellow at the Global Governance Institute's Ukraine program, which is located in Brussels. And also a disinformation analyst at one of the Ukrainian NGOs called Detector Media, where I deal mostly with the Russian disinformation campaigns and Russian propaganda in Europe and North America. My journey has been really interesting and combines a lot of experience in research field. For instance, almost 3 years working at one of the Ukrainian think tanks as a senior fellow, which included a position of being an expert in US politics and informational policy. At the same time, I've also had 7 internships combined. The list includes Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Embassy to the United States, the permanent mission of one interesting small state to international organizations in Vienna, where I was able to attend the meetings and other formats at the OSCE, IAEA, and other UN agencies headquartered in Vienna. And also at the Canadian House of Commons, which is one of the chambers of the Canadian Parliament. Currently, I am also pursuing my second master's degree in European interdisciplinary studies at the College of Europe Nadolin in Poland, which is considered to be the main diplomatic education institution of the European Union. And also my previous studying experience includes a master's degree in journalism and public communication at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin in Poland, and also a bachelor's degree in international relations and regional studies from the National University of Ostrohe Academy, which is a small town at the northwest of Ukraine. In addition to that, I've also had the experience of studying international relations at the University of Warsaw in Poland and at the Grand Valley State University in the United States during the exchange programs. From time to time, I'm also providing a commentary to the Ukrainian media on the situation with the United States politics currently, but also when I have time and when I have the ability, I'm also writing different articles and notepads to many different outlets related to the Ukraine politics and the situation that is happening in Ukraine. And yes, I'm also appearing there most of the time in the sweaters like these, because I think that people have to pay more attention always to the content than to the appearance. And I think that the so-called experts and expert field in general should not be intimidating or too serious for people. And it's just about explaining complicated processes by simple words, even though sometimes it's impossible because of how complex all these processes are. My apologies. So thank you so much for having me again, and I am really excited about this really important and fruitful conversation.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, my
We got a lot of
apologies.
arguments.
I forgot to add two things, which are, I think, the most important one, actually three things that are the most important ones to the date, also due to my obligations. The first thing, I'm also the Young Diplomat Award recipient in 2023 from the Ukrainian Academy of Youth Diplomacy, United Youth. Also, now I am the ambassador of the Global Human Responsibility Day campaign, launched by the Bogdan Havrilishin Family Foundation. And also, I am the co-founder and CEO of a project called Alliance of the Ukrainian Youth 2408. Where we tackle different issues that are damaging the bilateral Ukrainian-Polish relations. And when we are working currently on a number of very interesting projects in uniting the Ukrainian youth for the causes of the youth diplomacy in Poland.
Wow, that's impressive, to be honest. That's really impressive that we have such guests today with whom we can discuss about a lot of things related to Ukraine, to war, to diplomatic different relationships and other things. Thank you very much, Artur, that you are here today and we can discuss about different questions about Ukraine and not only. And my next question to you, throughout your career, you've been involved in many high-level discussions and diplomatic efforts, as we already understood from your experience and background. And what key experiences or moments have shaped your views on global conflict and international relationships that you doing a lot of research, writing some articles, giving some comments on different medias, as far as I know?
That's a really good question, because if we focus on the global conflict perspective, it probably was not the high level meeting, but it was definitely one of the classes that I took during my studies in the United States, which was international conflict and conflict resolution. I think it helped me to look at that thing from the theoretical perspective and put the theory to the practice, because we were working on the real life case studies. If we talk about some high level meetings that I had later during my internships and other things, you always have to remember one thing, that no matter what the position of a person you're talking to, you can expect many different suspicious things coming out from their mouths because of lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the local context, or just lack of, sometimes self-respect. Beware of conspiracy theories in such conversations, because there are still people in Ukraine who are like, neglecting the whole notion of seriousness of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theory research for the contemporary politics, not understand that it has a really huge impact, unfortunately, on the modern political landscape. And also, unfortunately, no matter how rich, no matter how educated people are, even in the most important offices of the world, there is at least one person who's believing in at least one conspiracy theory. And Russia has been extensively using that to its favor, unfortunately. And we really have to be aware of such processes and not ignore such tendencies or laugh them off, because I've started to research conspiracy theories and all of that, not because it was so funny and not because it was so like not because of how unserious it was, but because actually how serious of a problem that is, and how vast of an impact it has on our lives, unfortunately, specifically in the political context. So always beware of the conspiracy theories appearing up in such conversations, and really research the conspiracy theory field before you're dealing with these kinds of meetings, because when you do, you really are able to detect very well that this is the conspiracy and not just some philosophical talk.
Wow, that's interesting to hear, to be honest. I even didn't expect such things. So, thank you very much for sharing such information, because I guess our viewers also they don't aware about such things. So, given your extensive background, how do you see the role of diplomacy evolving in today's world, especially in the context of conflict like the one in Ukraine?
I know that some people don't like such an expression in Ukraine, and it's considered to be kind of cringy. But I really believe and I really think that there is a notion of the diplomatic front, diplomatic battlefield, because as a person who has seen that in my own eyes, during my time in international organizations, it really is a battlefield, and you really have to see that as a battlefield. Maybe there are no real weapons involved, but the informational warfare in modern times became even more dangerous and more serious than the actual fight with weapons. And it's so intertwined with something was happening in the 3D dimension on the ground. And our diplomats should really also fight that war, because without the diplomatic efforts, we would have no additional weapons to fight, no support, no public support in many countries, which is essential for that kind of ordeal. So diplomacy actually is more important in more important than ever in times of conflict than people think, because without the efficient diplomacy, people who are fighting on the ground would suffer the most. And when some people are just disrespecting the diplomatic field or just saying that it doesn't matter, of course, it's not comparable to something that people on the battlefield are doing. However, it's very much intertwined with something what they're doing. And it's really important to remember that diplomats are also finding their own dimension of the war, and their work is really important. But at the same time, it is really important for them to remember also that they are fighting another dimension of war, because sometimes it seems like even those people who are able to define the decision-making process or foreign policy, they sometimes neglect that, especially in the multilateral diplomacy, which involves international organizations, because there's a lot of skepticism to them in their work and etc. But trust me, it's the situation when you feel that it's not there when it's not there. Like you see its impact when it's gone. We are now just used to so many small details and things that diplomacy and international cooperation helps us provide, that we would see that only if it disappears, because it would make our lives so much harder. So really have to remember about that, and really have to remember that in any conflict, diplomacy takes its place, and that diplomacy doesn't mean necessarily to be subordinate, to be too comfortable for everyone, to be agreeing with everything what other people say. Diplomacy, first of all, it's about being brave. It's about being courageous enough to do some things, and it's about being innovative, modern, contemporary, to have fresh thinking, to be in the context of something that you're working with. And it's a very difficult job that not that many people would dare to do. But for me personally, it's really worth it. And I would love other people who are doing that job right now to think the same.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, as you already can understood our viewers, that diplomacy it's not that easy job that you are thinking. And before we are going to discuss more deeply about Ukraine situation and the war, I would like to mention to our viewers that if you will have any questions to Mr. Artur, please don't hesitate to text it below this interview, below this video, and after he will see it, he will definitely answer to all of your additional questions, because I know for a lot of people who's watching us today, you are really interested in authentic leadership, and authentic leadership couldn't be without a great diplomacy approach in that word, and that's true. So you have right now great chance to ask all the questions that you have, and even ask some advices if you would like to be a great diplomat, because Artur, as you already heard, he has great experience and a lot of achievements in that field too. So now, Artur, let's start with your thoughts on the current situation in Ukraine. How is it going right now? Let's give some short overview for our viewers about the war and what Ukraine face right now.
I'm not the military expert, which is very complicated. So in that context, I will rely mostly on the conclusions of some other people who really do that professionally. Currently, the war has been going in a very interesting direction, because we have the incursion of Kursk region, which has been absolutely unexpected for everybody except of those people who planned it. I think it's a very positive move from the point of the military strategy, because it was unexpected, it was surprising, and we can see that Russia is not that scaring, and not that not that scaring in the context of the rhetoric, because it already violated and broke all its promises, as it's called in the rhetoric, and red lines, as they called it multiple times, to basically proceed with some kind of reaction to all these processes. On the second level, we are having a very difficult situation at the Pokrovsk direction of the front, where the battle is very tense. At the same time, we also have to remember that, again, number one, the modern war is a combination of things that are happening on the ground and things that are happening in the digital field. So basically, the information war is very intense. It's very fierce. Also, we have to remember that the Russian aggression against Ukraine has been characterized also by the use of the modern technologies such as drones and other things. And we also have to remember about that, for instance, the internet connection, the information that we have about how to operate all these things also has a huge, also have a really huge impact on something that's been going on the ground. At the same time, as a person who is constantly monitoring the Russian propaganda efforts in that informational warfare dimension, there are many fakes, especially about those people who are in Europe, that targets and goals for these fakes, manipulations, and other pieces of disinformation are really diverse, but of course, all these goals are serving the Russian interest. For instance, there's a category of fakes that is made to basically discourage the European Union countries to accept the Ukrainian refugees. For instance, these are the fakes that are creating some stories that are negative looking for the Ukrainian audience, for instance, for example, like that some Ukrainian refugees like fired something up in, I don't know, Romania, and some beat somebody in Poland, and like et cetera, et cetera. But the informational warfare is at the same time really, really complicated also because of the fact that Russia is really adapting its disinformation campaigns towards the target country's local context. And that's unfortunately where the Ukrainian stakeholders are a little bit failing, because, for instance, they are putting one message for all countries and they don't adapt it to each particular country. Because it's time consuming, because it's resource consuming, I understand that. However, it's essential for the modern warfare. And Russia is doing it. For instance, Russia is translating its content to all main EU languages. For instance, Russia is tailoring its content to the local political landscape, historical landscape, social landscape. For example, there are Telegram channels created and guided by Russians in Polish, where you can see some takes on the Polish politics, Polish foreign policy, Polish historical tensions with Ukrainians. And they are just using all of this to stir the controversy against Ukrainians all the time. Therefore, we really should be careful and really should be considerate that the contemporary war is not only about weapons, and sometimes it can be as deadly as the war with the weapons. And there are real cases and real examples of that already, the real precedents. If we're talking about the international support dimension of the ongoing events, definitely because of the aforementioned reasons, such as the lack of tailoring the informational strategy towards each individual country and its realia. Unfortunately, there has been a decline in the public support for helping Ukraine further. Also, some far right and far left political movements, they jumped the bandwagon and they are constantly trying to portray themselves as the so-called de-escalation team when they are constantly playing on the Russian narrative of like they need to de-escalate the situation. And like for that reason, they are calling to stop aid for Ukraine. However, at the same time, it basically is serving one of the Russian propaganda targets, which is to basically distract people from the responsibility that Russia has for its aggression. So basically, Russia wants other people to think that its actions are not worse than the defense the Ukraine has. And basically, they want Ukraine to stop defending for the sake of de-escalation, for the sake of peace. However, at the same time, that version of peace that Russia presents to the world doesn't have anything constructive behind it, because it's just about serving the Russian interest, but it doesn't offer a huge platform for the negotiation compromise. Also, the just peace and peace formula of Zelensky, they also provide their version of peace, given a little bit more, but also at the same time, not that much space for compromise and negotiation, because the Ukrainian public at that moment, despite all the hardship, would not agree to surrender to Russia. At the same time, we also have to remember that the winter is coming and the Ukrainian energy sector right now is really under the attack. Many electro stations, many nuclear energy blocks, for instance, at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, they are either under the temporary occupation, where Russia is transforming them into their military base, or they are either under the constant threat of attacks coming from Russia. At the same time, we can say that there are more and more conversations about the possible negotiations, especially related to the US presidential campaign that is going on right now. And also the announcements about the peace summit to happening in November, and with the possibility of Russia being invited to it. So there is some progress, and I really recommend to all the viewers of that particular video to watch out and stay tuned with that situation, because everything updates so quickly, and there are really small details that help you put this whole puzzle and complete it. But I would think that we really have to see how these negotiations will go on in November, because I think that will be another important point, another milestone for this war, and then we'll be able to see where we stand and where we're going.
I got it. So there is a lot of key factors that playing role in this conflict right now, from the both side. And from your perspective, how is the war reshaping Ukraine's international politics and society?
That's a really complex question, because the thing is that, of course, there are positives and there are negatives to this whole thing. First of all, if we're talking about the positives, definitely Ukraine got a lot of publicity for the really unwanted reasons, but it really got a lot of publicity that it could convert into really cool public diplomacy efforts that would be effective and that would be heard. Some people found out where Ukraine is finally because of the war. The strategies that were used at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they were efficient enough at that time frame. But the war has changed. The people have changed. And the conditions also have changed. And now these strategies don't work that well. And there's an urgent need to adapt to this also in the diplomatic field. It's time to go away from the same style of statements, from the same style of rhetoric, the same style of basically the same style of communication with the outer world. It's time to change that. It's time to change the approaches. It's time to become more innovative. And it's time, and I know that those people who are working with that know what I'm talking about. It's time to give the Ministry of Foreign Affairs a better and bigger authority, because it's time to move on from that centric position of the president's office in the foreign policy, because it's not working anymore. It's working for the disadvantage of Ukraine, unfortunately, at that moment. It's time to diffuse a little bit all this messaging, especially in the EU countries, especially in Western Europe, and especially in North America. We also have to understand that in the informational capacity, our war conflicts with the situation that's been happening in Israel and Palestine. And for instance, in North America, more attention has been given to the second conflict rather than to the war in Ukraine at that time. I have seen that personally in Canada, for instance, last year. And we have to understand why, because people are getting tired of very emotional messaging. And we have to understand what we can do with that. And the thing that we can do is, again, to adapt our messaging to the realia and to the landscape and to the background and context of each country where we're talking. Because it's impossible for one message to be understood in the same way in Austria and in the United States. Especially taken into the account in the case of these two countries, that in Austria, there's a big tradition of anti-Americanism and something that has been tied with the American perception can be considered as under the scrutiny or under the big skepticism. If we're talking about the society, The changes are also there. At the same time, I really want to remind people, especially from Ukraine, who are staying abroad. As a person who has been researching propaganda professionally, I can confirm you with the evidence that one of the goals of Russia in this war is to simplify Ukrainians, is to simplify Ukraine to the very basic level, is to simplify the situation, is to erase all the nuance and lead the narrative in the comfortable for them way. It's about using the immaturity of the discourse that we have and play it along and amplify that. I am begging to stop overplaying the folklore. Stop overplaying all that thing and stop focusing only on something that we've seen or heard for a million times. Because people, especially in North America and Eastern Europe, because of that, consider us as shallow, as non-deep enough, non-complex, very basic, therefore not worthy enough to be supported. If you want Ukraine to have more support from these very affluent and very rich, frankly speaking, countries, show the complexity, be courageous to talk about your mistakes, about the underworks that Ukraine still has to overcome, about the reforms that we need to do and that we began to do. And start talking about the complexity of our culture, the modern dimension of our culture, the risk and the pay game of our culture. We need to show that Ukraine is complex in a positive way. We need to show that because we want Ukraine to be perceived as a worthy enough player on the international arena. And in the modern times, it's not done just with the notion of the war, and not in 2024. We finally have to justify all the sacrifice that we have for that. And it's the time for reforms, the time for new narratives, the time to bring more complexity to the Ukrainian positioning. It's time to talk about our mistakes, about our flaws, because every country in the world is flawed. There is no country that is perfect, because the politics and the governments would not exist in that scenario. They would be just the document keepers and bureaucrats to deal with the basic things. Politics would be dead in general if there would be no issues. Stop idealizing our country abroad. It's working against Ukraine because it's following the Russian mindset and the very Soviet mindset. Because guess the country that will never, ever talk bad about itself on the international landscape. It starts with R and ends with A. Trust me, I have seen that. I have seen that personally. Russia will never talk anything bad about itself on the international space. And Ukraine is not Russia. And we have to completely remove, like a band-aid, completely remove that Russian mindset and Russian way of thinking. And we have to focus on something that's very constructive and very important. Ukraine is a modern European country that's done a ton of amazing things in the course of the war. It's still standing, it's still courageous, it's still brave. And it's our job in the future not to waste all the sacrifice that many people had for the better future of that country. And idealizing everything that we have is definitely not helping that cause. So we need to be honest and we need to be mature and we need to be sincere with the audience. And that's what I'm also trying to do all that time. And I really hope that someday it will work out.
I hope so. I hope so that everyone who will watching our discussion today, especially Ukrainians, they will hurt you, and they will doing whatever they will need to do for our country. Because today we're talking both Ukrainians, we're talking about Ukraine, we are talking about war, we're talking about truth, what's going on in our country, and trying to share more info about it around the world. And you know, if we talk about if we talk about all propaganda things, historical, some narratives that we have in Ukraine that came to us after Soviet Union, and even all of the things we are trying to fight with that. Ukrainians, not all of them, unfortunately, but that's true, not all of them trying to fight with that, but some of them, they are doing really great things. And I have a lot of questions today for discussion with you, but at the same time, I wanna just to ask everyone who's watching us today to share everywhere this video. If you even from another country like African countries, Asian countries, and you are not in Ukrainian, but you can help us to get more support from other people once you are sharing the truth what's going on in Ukraine. And even I know that some Ukrainian, they are living in African countries, in Southern America and other countries, they will see that video thankful for you, and they will think how they will be able to support our countries and help us to bring the peace in our land and independence for sure. And yeah, let's move on to another questions, because it's really interesting to discuss with you, Artur, and discuss about truth, because I guess only you, this person that can share everything about that, because you have huge experience and you're working with that. And how would you evaluate the level of support Ukraine has received from its Western partners so far? And in your opinion, is the support from the European Union and NATO countries enough to ensure a sustainable defense for Ukraine? Or what else Ukraine needs to be done for getting more support in this war?
I want to make one thing clear before starting answering that particular question. The thing is that we are tend to think that other countries are obligated, are obliged to give us support and etc. However, we always have to keep in mind that the job of every government by the theoretical outset is to care about its own people first. And in case if it wants, about people in other countries. Therefore, it has never, ever been a 100% duty of Western countries to help us. Therefore, I'm really grateful to all people who are somehow involved in that, because again, it took a lot of political will and a lot of political courage to do that. Now, if we're talking about the very technical aspects of that conversation, the thing is that maybe on paper, something that Ukraine has got is not enough, but it actually has a really practical reason. The thing is that the military complex and the way the military industry, let's call it like that, and the way it worked before the Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2022, it was really tame, very minimalistic. It did not have that much effort. Companies were doing only the contracts that were long-term. And for instance, I don't know, one company was having one line to do like a very small number of tanks to one country in 3 years. But when the invasion has started, and when basically Ukraine happened to be in need of more weapons to stand against the aggression, many Western military companies appeared in a place where they did not have the capacity to manufacture more weapons. Because if people don't understand how it's happening, manufacturing a weapon takes some time. It can take a year. It can take a few years. The assembly process of some weapons also takes years. And for instance, it's not working like you're coming to, for example, to Poland and you're like, I need 10 tanks for tomorrow. And like you have 10 tanks. If you do, these are the defense arsenal of that country. These are not new. To make new weapons, you need to have a contract. You need to have the manufacturer line. For instance, many companies now expanded their capacities to serve the war, but it still takes some time because you still need to make the details. You still need to make the equipment. So many people who are thinking about this need to understand that it's not like you cannot turn air into tanks in 1 second. It takes time and it takes a lot of work. Now, if we're talking about some other capacities, if we're talking about the humanitarian dimension, maybe yes, some countries did more than others in terms of the financial capacity also. But at the same time, it's really important for many countries to lift so many bureaucratic barriers for Ukrainians abroad, because it's also another dimension of help. Because, for instance, at the beginning of the war, many Ukrainians were having issues in looking for a job in Germany and Austria because the Ukrainian education certificates, diplomas, etc., were not accepted by German and Austrian companies, institutions, and enterprises. And people, for example, who were working as the accountants or the doctors in Ukraine, they were forced to work as cleaners in Germany and Austria. And Russia has been using that to create a narrative that Ukrainians are only capable of doing the simple, hard, at the same time, simple by the intellectual capacity and hard by the physical capacity, physically demanding jobs only. but it was because of the bureaucratic burden. Now, for instance, many procedures are still very complicated for Ukrainians abroad. And the Ukraine and the European job market is still very competitive, like for the citizens of the respective countries, but additionally to Ukraine, because many companies are feeling reluctant in hiring Ukrainians for top positions, putting their own citizens down a little bit, even despite the fact that these people might have more experience and might have more relevant knowledge and background than the citizens of that country. Together with the disinformation, together with all of that, together with a very complex political landscape of the region as a whole, for instance, Hungary is doing its own thing. Polish concept of help and solidarity is another story. It's very complex, it's very complicated. The historical tensions are intertwined with the foreign policy goals, like we can talk about that for hours. Slovakia is doing another, like, its own thing. Balkans are in their own lane. Like, again, it talks a lot about having every country's situation under the microscope and every country's context under the microscope and taking that into account. But in general, especially at the very beginning of the war, the support has been really well. The question is that support has to be stable and has to be sincere. When it's calculated and when it's done only for the political hype, it's really non-long lasting. I think it's finally the opportunity for Ukraine to turn this support both from North America and from many European countries to something long-lasting and something long-term. It's a very difficult and very challenging job to do, but it's very important. I think it's essential for the future of Ukraine, taking also into the account the reconstruction efforts that will be made in the future. Therefore, we also need to think about the future. We don't have to focus only on now. Like, I know that there are people who are like saying, we will deal with everything like after the war. Now we have to focus on the war and etc. But it's not working like that in the contemporary circumstances. There is a number of different stakeholders who are really ready to give money if they have a plan for the future. It's very challenging to have the war, to do the reforms, to do the European integration, to do the informational war, and to have the transformation of your country and reconstruction at the same time. It's so challenging, but there's no other way to do it, unfortunately, in the current circumstances. We really need to think about the future now. We really have to do a plan of what we're gonna do in the future, how we're gonna do it, and what it takes and what it will take, apparently, for us to do it in a good and constructive way. We already have to think about that. And I really hope that the focus for the help, it's already started happening, but still, I really hope that we will be able to put the focus in all the support efforts into the future.
I hope so too. And, talking about also supporting and our partners that we have in Ukraine during that time of war, how do you think, how to assess the role the US has played in supporting Ukraine both diplomatically and military, and with the upcoming US elections, how do you think changes in leadership could affect American foreign policies towards Ukraine?
I really want everyone to listen to this particular answer I hope that many people will listen to that answer. We can criticize the United States however we want, in the way we want, and how as much time as we want. But it will not remove the fact that if there would be another country instead of the United States on the position of the United States, for example, Russia, China, Iran, like whoever aims for that position, it would be so much worse and so much limiting for many people in terms of the basic needs and something that we really used to in our lives. For that capacity, it's also really difficult to be the United States in that position, because no matter what you do, everyone will criticize you in some way. And you still have to keep on going. I think that we got really lucky to have Joe Biden as the president during that time, because, well, I talk with many US professors and many people who critically research the American politics, and they all say that there would be no better person on that position than Joe Biden to handle this, because of his moderate experience, because of his background. For the United States, it's a very sensitive situation, and they dealt with it, maybe not in the perfect way, but at least it was better than it could have been. The United States were the leading force in convincing the European Union countries to provide more support. The United States basically provided many contracts. Could they do more? Yes. But again, number one, it's our job to convince them. And number two, it's their decision to make. We cannot force citizens of other country just to give us money because we exist.
That's true.
We really need to think about that. Could they do more? Yes. Would their actions be more efficient in that context? Definitely. I think Ukraine would have a very big privilege on the battlefield because of that. However, it's not just like this and that. It takes the work of many, many people, and takes a lot of political will. Now, I am really angry and at the same time baffled by the fact that even in the context of the war and the Russian aggression, there are people in Ukraine, including in the Ukrainian media, in the Ukrainian political establishment, and in the Ukrainian civil society, that are supporting Trump in these elections, that are saying that he would help Ukraine and be more decisive. I have never, ever seen such a delusion in my professional life. Imagine your country is at war. It's the second day of the invasion, and a person from the United States comes to the radio and says, well, actually, yeah, it was a smart move.
But
I want people to remember that when they are like saying, well, like now the United States are not giving us like as much as we want, that like Trump will be more decisive. Guys, Trump of 2016 and 2024 are two different political figures. And the thing is that the biggest problem with all of that is that, number one, we have already seen the evidence that Russian interest is the top interest in Trump's mind and policies. Number two, there's the evidence where Trump and his allies are repeating the Russian propaganda. There are Russian money involved, and there's also the evidence for that. And still, after all of this, there are people in Ukraine who are like, he would be more decisive. He would be more rapid in delivering Ukraine the weapons. They're always loving this mantra about javelins. Wow, Trump gave out javelins not because he wanted to help Ukraine. Actually, the topic of Ukraine is toxic for Trump. And it was one of his intentions to make Ukraine toxic for the United States. Actually, and there's also the evidence about that. When these javelins were given, it was basically an offer. And he responded, yeah, whatever, give it to whoever like needs them. I don't care. This person does not care about like some foreign policy or domestic policy goals. All these people who think that he puts American interest first are, I don't know how they're living in this world, because it appears that it's so easy to be fooled by that. The Trump's main interest is a word made of 5 letters that starts with T and ends with P. It's the word Trump, and it has always been like that. And the main threat, actually, there are 2 main threats for Ukraine in the scenario if Trump wins. Number 1, they have already done a lot of damage to the previous support efforts of the United States, and they were slowed down because of him. And apparently, the Trump's so-called solution plan is not looking good. Of something that we see. Maybe it was a plan all along for some people in the Ukrainian establishment. But I want really all these people later on to explain the Ukrainians who lost their families and lost their homes. What for? Wait for that long just to accept that thing. And number 2, Trump of the version 2024 is aimed to reshape the institutional fabric of the United States completely. He wants to limit all the power in his hands by reforming the institutions. Therefore, without the president's approval, it would be almost impossible to do anything in that scenario. Therefore, we would not even talk about any kind of aid to Ukraine, because he would be more decisive not for the Ukrainian interest, but he would be more decisive about himself and his power. And I'm so saddened that so many people in the country that is going through the war started by one of the main allies of this person are still believing that Trump is serving Ukraine. I'm baffled. Of course, I understand that the people in the position of power, they cannot just slam the door and say like that we will not work with that guy anymore. Of course, they need to be creative and look for some avenues and ways to cooperate even with that, focusing on the numbers, focusing on the notion that actually support for Ukraine is better for the US economy first, because it provides a huge investment into the United States military complex and industry. So we need to focus on that in the conversation with them. But at the same time, there are people in the political establishment who have nothing to do with the relations with the United States or whatsoever, and they are just pushing this agenda. And this is very harmful and very dangerous. And I will be like, if needed, till November, I will be literally standing on the street and talking with that people to have some mind, because like I don't know what else I should do during the course of these months to convince people with the already open source evidence, and Americans who I talked with are agreeing with me. That's the most important thing. There are facts. And as one of the American professors told me recently in a conversation about this whole thing, please remind people that Trump killed many Americans during the COVID for his personal image, because he did not want to look bad. Would he care about Ukrainians? That's the question. Yes, there are many issues with the current administration. We can make a list and we can argue about that. Many things could be faster. Many things could be less bureaucratic. Yes, there are issues. But is it worth it to push a person who really wants to turn this country into the dictatorship just for the sake of your own selfish goals because something was not fast enough, and put the whole region into the turmoil? I don't think so. And patient in like pacifying all the audiences with like everything will be fine, everything will be okay, just based on the previous experience. How chaotic was the previous Trump's presidency? We are still recovering from that with that wave of populism in Europe. And now he's not that unaware of the American institutional capacity, because he turned to be a president on accident for the first time. And he didn't know about many processes, and there were many bureaucrats around him. Now everything is different. He's already employing people. And the biggest criteria, the most important criteria in that thing right now is the loyalty to Trump and his views. No professional background, no experience. The top criterion is the loyalty to Donald Trump. If it is so, trust me, it will be 10 times more difficult to get any aid for Ukraine coming from that point of view. It has to be a miracle. I would be really glad if the destiny would prove me wrong. Trust me. I'm saying this not because I support somebody or because I want somebody to win or because I want to be right. No, I would love to be wrong in that situation. If I am wrong, I will be happy. But these are just the pieces of evidence and facts that show that, unfortunately, everything is going to that kind of path if he wins. And it's my duty, at least the citizen duty, to inform other people who don't know about this. And on a finishing note, how barfing it would be that one of the top Ukrainian media outlets is publishing an interview with the Secretary of the State in previous Trump's administration, Mike Pompeo, with the headline, quote, "Trump's ally and defender of Ukraine." How baffling it would be for one of the top Ukrainian media outlets to become the Fox News.
But you know what's the interesting thing for me right now? In your opinion, why do you think we have such situation in Ukraine that our policymakers, some TV media, they support Trump? Do you think it is due to corruption or there's another reason could be for that?
It's about one simple thing. It's about the conservative type of thinking. Those people are afraid of reforms. They're afraid of something new. They're afraid of this so-called progressive agenda, whatever that means. These are the people who just don't respect people on the other side. This is the white males club that is thinking in a very cynical and very calculated way, but expects everybody else around to think with the heart. That's the biggest paradox that baffles me all the time. How can you expect the whole world cry about Ukraine when you're so cynical about others, including people in your own country? There is a category of people in that industry, and I will purposefully call that industry, who are trying to calculate international politics only with the numbers, only like with the theory, only like with everything. As a person who have seen all these processes in my own eyes, theory doesn't work like that in international relations. There is no leader who is reading the theory books when governs. People govern based on their experience, on their background, on their values, if they have some. And the thing is that basically we need to consider the importance of people first in international diplomacy. We are saying that the conflict is a result of the human nature. Is it true? Yes, it is. Do we sometimes have to think about the conflict in a very cynical way, like versus only through the numbers, etc.? Yes. But does it have to take away from the human dimension of all of that? Of course not. All of that has to serve the human dimension, not to replace that. For instance, we don't want to get too emotional when analyzing the conflict because we want to help people, because we want to present the unbiased options, the unbiased position. Because if you put rose-colored glasses, or you see everything as very dark, it will help no one. It's about basically having that human perspective in international relations. And when we stop promoting this outdated mindset of spheres of influence, of like realism, excuse me, realpolitik, etc., this all goes to window because number one, theories are explaining something that has happened in the past, not something that's going on in real time or in the future, because the war in Ukraine is not over yet to make some theoretical assumptions about it. Trust me, there will be scholars who will be doing a new kind of theory based on that, because no current theory explains the ongoing war. Number two, Russia's actions are 100% irrational. Those people who are thinking and saying that the current actions of Russia are going in line with the concept of realpolitik and realism, they can get an F for the theory of political science or international relations, and they can throw themselves out of the window because they don't know political theory. Because from every single aspect of these both theories, Russia should not have started that war. And I fell into that in 2022 when I thought that this would not happen, because everybody at that time was pushing the narrative of Putin being rational mastermind who did this and that with the realism in mind. There's nothing like that. It doesn't work, because from every perspective of realism or realpolitik, this war was a losing one for Russia because it's wasted a huge ton of money, a huge ton of potential with its corrupted army for nothing, basically. It's completely irrational. And we have to stop calculating everything in this world with the data and etc. We need to think about the human perspective, about the cultural, historical, political, all other landscapes that we can take into the account, about the complexity and nuance of the whole situation. For instance, basically, people who support Trump in these elections, most of the time, they're also saying something like, pop culture is not related to the politics. It's something separate. Well, guess who is the biggest recipient of the pop culture's impact on the politics? Because Donald Trump is the product of pop culture. Before becoming the president, he was the reality show host. And the thing is that all those people, they just can't see the reality. They're living in their own world of rainbows and unicorns, but they finally have to walk out and face the reality. It's complex. It's baffling. Some people just support him because they don't want to deal with all the complexity, all the nuance. They just like what he says, and that's it. Well, then don't call yourself the specialist in the US politics, because it's all about the nuance. The US politics is very challenging, very complicated, and very complex to work with. It's very dynamic. Every word can literally change the whole trajectory of the political landscape. It's so difficult. But at the same time, if you just scope around like many articles and if you don't understand how the country is living, if you don't look into the deeper racial, cultural, historical, artistic sometimes landscapes of that country, regional landscapes of that country, you don't understand America, and you will not understand it in many processes, because many people are focusing on the elections and the results of the elections, but not that many people want to dig in something what shapes the results of these elections. And these are the political, the cultural, the historical tendencies that are happening right now in that country. These people don't want to tackle this, but it's essential for understanding that very complex, very flawed, but very characteristic country on its own. And we really have to remember about that all the time when talking about the United States, that also being as so-called the global policeman or police person takes some sacrifice in forgetting about your own issues and putting your head forward. Many people also support Trump in Ukraine because of the notion that the United States are not decisive enough, as it's called, or not confident enough, or not active enough about Ukraine. The thing is that it also has a reason. Now, the United States are more cautious about any military intervention or about basically giving too much attention to any abroad conflict, because it's already did with Vietnam, Korea, global war on terror. And when at the beginning, human nature is very interesting. At the beginning, before the United States stepped in, people were asking for the United States, come, go there, help us, we need your help. They were going there, and because of many different factors, they could not stay, they could not rebuild the infrastructure, and etc., etc. And they left. And many people were like, why did you go there? Why did you intervene? Why did you help anybody? And etc., especially Russia. is their favorite thing, especially with the Yugoslavia wars. And the thing is that, of course, now they are like carefully thinking about what to do and what not to do, because again, no matter what the United States do, it will be always criticized, no matter what. So of course, now they have to carefully think how to not lose their own public opinion, and at the same time to have this delicate balance of power, and at the same time like dealing with the consequences of the conflict, and at the same time maintaining the influence. Like it's a very complex thing. The Russian aggression against Ukraine is an unprecedented by the theoretical dimension conflict for international relations, because it mixes so many unmixable things all together. Those people who don't know the local context and don't know the history of Russia, and et cetera, all of that, they are probably perplexed. I don't know what's going on in their minds, but I doubt that they really understand what this conflict is about, because it's so difficult to do so. We expect people to understand without any prior knowledge of that and without any local context. We expect people to understand why there is the situation with the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. We expect that from people who barely knew where Ukraine is a few years ago. We have to literally touch grass sometimes to understand what are we talking about. Because, for instance, in the case with the Russian Orthodox Church, I had that kind of conversation during one of my experiences in international organizations. And people were basically scared of such decisions because of the lack of communication. And I started explaining them that actually this is the security, this is the national security dimension, this is the national security decision. And people are asking me back, why only now then? Why didn't you do that earlier, before the invasion? And I tell them, I also don't know. And these are the many paradoxes that we have in that conflict. And of course, people cannot understand that if there's a lack of communication, lack of adaptation, and lack of basically all of that. So if long story short, basically this is a number of different factors, and everything is contradicting each other, but that's the world we're living in currently.
And continued discussion about partners. I also have interesting question. We talked a lot about Western partners, about the USA, and could you please quickly add some your opinions about how important is the role of non-Western powers like China, India, in mediating or influencing the conflict? And also, in this context, could you please say about do you see the United Nations or other international bodies having a greater role in future peace negotiations?
Now the thing with other actors is also complex. Maybe you will all kill me, but again, from the geostrategical point of view and from the United States perspective, of course, it's important to somehow have India. Furthermore, I don't support China. I never did. I always was against this country, but country's regime specifically, and its actions. But from the geostrategical point of view, the Chinese option actually is kind of smart one, because China is striving for the global dominance, or at least at least for a place in deciding how the future international security looks like. And it tries to show that kind of dominance in the region via various actions. At the same time, giving them space to be a mediator in the war of Ukraine is a smart move because it gives that place and it can help prevent the Taiwan situation from happening. But from the Ukrainian perspective, again, and coming here as the Ukrainian, the thing is that it would be a catastrophe for the Ukrainian interests. Because if they planned the Chinese involvement in this whole ordeal, they should not have forced Ukrainian people to hate China, because it was happening like that during the first years. Like everybody in the Ukrainian media, etc., was criticizing China, except of one group of people, but they are always obsessed with it for some reason. I personally think that China is much weaker than it seems and shows to the world, and I really think that we don't have to, like, the Ukraine, with its values and its norms, shouldn't care about the cooperation with China. To be honest, like, we are on the different crossroads, and I beg people not to accept any infrastructural projects from China, because this is like another way of warfare. And I don't trust this country after what happened with the COVID-19. It's another conversation. The thing is that basically we are having a situation now when a huge chunk of people in Ukraine would simply not understand and be very disappointed for having a peace deal with China, because the Ukrainian political establishment built the image of China as like this big and evil supporter of Russia, which it is. I want to underscore that. My personal opinion, it is. It is complicit in everything that's been going on. But again, it's about the positioning, it's about the informational framing of things. If they expected China to participate in this negotiation, and it's also the Indian case, they should not have portrayed these both countries as one of the biggest evil in the world. They should have left some space for that kind of thing. And I would really doubt that they would find the formula that would be sufficient to explain that kind of thing. Now, if we're talking about the participation of the international organizations in the process, of course, they are in a more comfortable position to be the mediators. For instance, the grain deal for the Black Sea that has been negotiated sometime earlier, the UN was the main force behind it, basically. So it has the case study. I also want to, I want people to pay attention to the OSCE in that context, because I can give you almost the 100% guarantee, and I know that for a fact also from the Ukrainian stakeholders who are in the field, that the OSCE will be the go-to international organization after the peace negotiations, because it falls right into the OSCE's portfolio. The OSCE has been dealing with many projects related to tackling the conflict, basically creating the environment after the conflict that has been beneficial, and working on a number of projects to improve the situation on the ground, etc., etc. The OSCE will be the go-to organization after the peace negotiations. If it, like, would it participate in the peaceful negotiations? I doubt it, because the OSCE has the negative precedent in the Minsk agreements. The OSCE was behind the Minsk agreements and it failed. unfortunately. So now I don't think that the OSCE is in the position to participate in something like that. I don't see any other players except of the UN and the OSCE being very involved in this whole like ordeal, to be honest, because they are either too far away or they are too specific. Because, for instance, the UN has many agencies inside of it. Like, for instance, IAEA is the UN agency, UNIDO is the UN agency, et cetera, et cetera. So UN or basically the OSCE. European Union? I don't think so, because the European Union is seen by Russia as one of the sides of the conflict. The second peace summit will be happening in November, and there we'll see how the things go, but the UN participates there. So we will see how it goes. Now, I know that you have many viewers here from African countries.
Yeah, and not only.
And yeah, and also from South America. And I also want to talk about the Global South, as it's called, in this war. Ukraine is underworking with the Global South. And unfortunately, and I'm really so sorry about that. And I hope that we'll be able to change that kind of mindset in the future. It's because we were always, at least those people in the diplomatic and political establishment, they were always thinking about European and North American countries being the best ones and all other ones be like not important ones. Well, Alexandra knows that well because she has seen that personally during my studies during the bachelor's degree. I always was saying that Ukraine has a huge potential in Africa, and that Ukraine should look at Africa, not Asia. This Asian mindset, again, don't get me wrong, I don't have that much experience with African issues, African continent. I don't understand the African political landscape. I'm not a specialist in that. My work experience is mostly related to Europe and North America. But again, Ukraine has a huge potential in Africa, especially through the creative industries, especially through the cultural diplomacy. And I really think we should communicate and talk with Africa and South America. I think that if we would do that earlier, we'd have a much, much better situation with the war, because these countries are not as important than other ones. I have seen that in the UN. And one of the biggest sorrows that I express and that I will have to deal with is the fact when, for example, the diplomats from some African countries were saying, well, we feel you and we understand that your situation is bad, but we cannot support you because you did not support us some time ago when we were in a similar situation. And it's so saddening that we will have to deal with the things like these in the future and now. And I am so angry at all those diplomats who were doing stuff like this when they were working in 2010, 2011, 2012, etc. I really hope that our future diplomatic field will take into the account the significance of the Global South, and we'll start working with that constructively. And it doesn't mean coming there and thinking that everyone here is like of a low level and then everybody needs our help there and blah, blah, etc. It's about respecting those people, and it's about basically having them on your own level and having a constructive conversation based on their complex political, social, cultural, historical landscape. And we need to work with those because Russia started working with these regions earlier, and we are seeing the consequences of that right now, because Russia has been pushing its own agenda in these countries, and we need to do with that. It's already too late, but at least we can do something with that right now. And I really hope that our African and Latin American friends will understand this whole thing better after this interview, because many people are talking in the stamps or in the very official meaning of that, but actually people from these regions need to understand that even those people who work directly with that conflict don't always understand things that are happening because it's so complex. It's just the way it is. You cannot just say that something is simple when it's not. And you cannot just explain some things. I know that maybe you've personally in your lives have experienced something like that. And there are things like these in the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's very complex, but at the same time, we have been attacked. And it's really important to remember that all the time, that we just want to move on. We just want a European future because we've been in the European countries, we've seen that, and we want that kind of future for our kids and their kids. It's about that. It's only about that. And Russia is just taking away that right from us. Because, for example, in 2014, we had the Revolution of Dignity, which basically was a revolution against people taking away from us, again, our European aspirations, our European identity, and replacing that with the corruption brought by Russia. Because if we would dig deeper into the Ukrainian political context, we could also see that all the bad things in the Ukrainian political climate, in the Ukrainian political industry, have been brought by Russia. And it's not just like the beautiful statement. It has a very simple explanation, because many presidents throughout the Ukrainian history, they were working with the Russian political technologists, and they were using the Russian money to go to power. It's just about that. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's not just beautiful
It's more
words.
simple than you think.
It's just about that, and it's true. We have such an extensive corruption in politics and such a Soviet mindset because of Russia. And we just wanted to overcome it. We just wanted to become better. It took us, unfortunately, some sacrifice because of that resistance. But we just want to live a better life. And that's it. And we have to fight back sometimes to the bully. And I really hope that we will have that bright European future, no matter what Russia says, because trust me, if somebody in these regions thinks that Russia is rich, affluent, modern, etc., it's the biggest myth Russia created about itself, and it invests a lot of money into creating that myths and keeping it alive.
We know
Because
it from
trust
the
me,
practice way.
exactly, because as a person who knows that personally, trust me, something that you see in Moscow and in St. Petersburg is a completely different Russia from, for example, Perm, Ukhta, Syktyvkar, Norilsk, all these other small cities, because there are people who have no tap water, no heating, no infrastructure, no roads, no job, no money, no goods. It's a very poor country.
Yeah, we saw that
Some
during the
households
war.
don't even have electricity. And this is not the country that can bring peace and prosperity to other regions of the world, because it did not manage to do so, even in its own country.
Yeah, that's true because we saw it during the first year of fighting with Russia, and have soldiers from Russia side stole everything from the Ukrainians' homes, even toilets. And that's true. You can even Google it and search information, see pictures about that. That's not something that we just imagine for ourselves and want to share this information, but that's the real thing. That's facts. That's going on. And yeah, I know that some African countries, even right now, facing the same issues like Ukraine faced in 2014, and you are fighting also with some of your policymakers. You are fighting for your peace, for your kids, for their futures. And that is our similarities. We're fighting all together for better future for ourselves, for our kids, and living in the peace. And unfortunately, we need to wrap up today's interview already. But I still have final questions to Artur. And thank you very much for sharing your valuable insights today for all of this complex information. Of course, I had much more questions, but to be honest, we still have limited time for discussion because if we will talk about Ukraine more, I guess it will be 5 hours conversation, 5 hours interview, and if so, it is much better to record it another topic discussion about other some additional questions in separate way. So we will do. If you will like this video, please don't forget to comment, put your like, subscribe to our channel because it's important to us to see that you're really interested to watching our conversation and all other videos on our YouTube channel. And yeah, we will record additional things, additional conversations not only about Ukraine, but also more globally discussion about political and diplomatic fields. And finally, Artur, what do you think the future holds for Ukraine in terms of rebuilding its international position and ecosystem, economically post-war, and what do you believe are the most critical factors that will determine the future of Ukraine in this ongoing conflict?
I really hope that our generation will be able to turn things around and do things differently and to do everything best, not to waste all the sacrifice and all the effort done by other people for the better future. Sometimes it would require to take some risks. Sometimes it would require to be courageous, be brave, and go against the world, basically. But I think that if we finally let go the Soviet mindset, we would be really, really, really in a much better position than we've been before. From the current perspective, I really hope that we will shed away all the negative aspects of that Soviet mindset, including corruption, including, again, mindset is also a very important notion in the politics and in the context. And we really would focus on the constructive effort. We will shed away all the talk about like political affiliation or something like that. And we would focus on the constructive action and we would work hard. Trust me. Now, the ongoing war is difficult, but the biggest challenges will be happening right after the negotiations. It will be the most challenging time that Ukraine has ever had because it will be a huge test for all of us. in terms of the future of our country. We will really need to focus on democracy, on the values, and on the reconstruction. It will be challenging and it will be difficult. But if we have our goals set and if we follow them, I think it's manageable. I think we can do it.
Very much. Thank you very much, Artur, for joining us today, for sharing all your in-depth analysis on such a critical topic. And thank you for your opinions and everything that you shared with us. I know that it's really valuable for everyone to hear the information that you shared. Your insights into the Ukraine war, international diplomacy, and the potential outcomes have been incredible value. And we really appreciate your time and experience, your expertise for today's conversation. Thank you very much once more
Thank
time,
you
and
very
hope we will
much.
record more discussions with you in the near
Hopefully.
future. And for everyone who's watching us today, thank you for tuning it to today's conversation. We hope you found this discussion as enlightening as we did. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments below, and most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to the Cactil YouTube channel for more interviews, expert analysis, and inspiring content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you again for watching us, and we will see you in the next video.